The bones cracked between her teeth like dry branches in a winter storm. Blood still dripped from the jagged stone in her trembling hands, mixing with the ancient dirt beneath her feet. In the flickering light of the dying fire, shadows danced across cave walls that told a story no human should ever witness. Scratched deep into the rock were symbols, drawings, and marks that spoke of unthinkable acts. Acts of survival, acts of horror. She was a female Homo habilis, and her name was Kira. What she discovered in that forsaken cave 6.4 million years ago would forever change our understanding of early humanity as darkest chapter. Because sometimes, when faced with extinction, even our ancestors crossed lines that should never be crossed. This is the story of the Hidden Massacre, the story of when hunger turned brothers into prey. The wind howled through the barren landscape like the cries of the dying. Kira pressed her small frame against the rocky outcrop, her dark eyes scanning the endless expanse of drought-stricken savanna. The acacia trees stood like skeletal fingers against the crimson sky, their leaves long since withered and fallen. For 7 moons, no rain had blessed their territory. The once abundant herds of gazelles and antelope had migrated far beyond the reach of her tribe. Even the insects had vanished, leaving only the persistent buzz of death in the air. "Nothing," whispered Thak, her hunting companion, as he emerged from behind a cluster of boulders. His ribs showed through his weathered skin, a testament to the famine that gripped their people. "The tracks are old. 3, maybe 4 days." Kira's stomach contracted painfully. She could taste the metallic tang of hunger on her tongue, a flavor that had become as familiar as breathing. Behind them, hidden in the cave they called home, 14 members of their tribe waited, children with hollow eyes, elders whose strength ebbed with each passing day. "We keep searching," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words came out cracked and dry, like the earth beneath their feet. But as they descended into the valley below, following what might have been ancient animal trails, a different scent reached her nostrils. Not the musty smell of old bones or dried vegetation. This was fresher, warmer. It was the scent of smoke. And meat. Thak grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with desperate strength. "Do you smell that?" Kira nodded slowly. Her heart began to pound, not with fear, but with hope. Someone had made a kill. Someone had food. They moved like shadows across the rocky terrain, their bare feet silent against the stones. As they crested a small hill, they saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from what appeared to be a cave entrance, partially hidden by a curtain of hanging vines. But something was wrong. The smell of cooking meat was intoxicating, making her mouth water uncontrollably. Yet underneath that savory aroma was something else. Something that made her primitive brain recoil with an instinctive terror she couldn't name. "We approach carefully," she whispered to Thak. "If they share, we offer what we can. If they refuse ... double quotes, she didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what desperation could drive a person to do. As they crept closer to the cave, the sounds from within became clearer. Not the cheerful chatter of a successful hunting party, but something more primal, more disturbing. It was the sound of feeding, aggressive, animalistic feeding. And then, drifting on the smoke-laden air, came a sound that froze the blood in Kira's veins. Human screaming. The screaming stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving only the crackling of fire and a wet, tearing sound that made Kira's skin crawl. She exchanged a glance with Thak, seeing her own horror reflected in his wide eyes. Every instinct told her to run, to flee back to their own starving tribe and forget what they had heard. But the smell of cooked meat was overwhelming, and the gnawing emptiness in her belly drove her forward like an invisible hand pushing against her back. They reached the cave entrance just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. The hanging vines created a natural curtain that allowed them to peer inside without being seen. What Kira witnessed would haunt her for the rest of her days. 7 figures sat around a crude fire pit, their faces and hands stained with fresh blood. They were like her people, early humans struggling to survive in a hostile world. But their eyes held a madness she had never seen before. A wild, predatory gleam that belonged more to hyenas than to thinking beings. In the center of their circle lay the source of the meat. Kira's hand flew to her mouth, stifling the scream that threatened to escape. The body was small, barely more than a child, with the characteristic features of their species. But it had been butchered like prey, carved and prepared with the same casual efficiency they might use on a gazelle. "By the spirits," Thak breathed beside her, his voice so quiet she almost didn't hear it. The leader of the group, a massive male with scars covering his arms and chest, looked up from his meal. His teeth, stained red with blood, gleamed in the firelight as he smiled with satisfaction. "The meat is sweet," he said to his companions, his words echoing off the cave walls. "Sweeter than any animal we've taken." "There are more in the deep caves," replied another, a female whose hair was matted with dried blood. "The weak ones. The old ones. They cannot run." Kira felt her world tilt on its axis. They weren't just eating human flesh, they were hunting their own kind. Systematically. Deliberately. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light within the cave, she began to notice details that made her stomach lurch. Bones scattered around the fire pit. Not animal bones, but the unmistakable remains of hands, feet, and skulls. Some were old and weathered, others still glistening with marrow. And then she saw the walls. Carved into the stone were images that told a story of horror. Stick figures pursuing other stick figures. Scenes of capture and slaughter. And most disturbing of all, crude calendars marking what appeared to be hunting cycles. This wasn't desperation born of sudden famine. This was organized predation that had been going on for seasons. "We have to go," she whispered to Thak, but when she turned, he was gone. Panic flooded her system as she realized she was alone. Had he fled in terror, leaving her behind? Or worse, had the cannibals discovered and taken him? A twig snapped behind her. Kira spun around to find Thak emerging from the shadows, but he wasn't alone. 3 of the cannibals flanked him, their hands gripping crude stone weapons. His eyes were wide with terror, and a thin line of blood trickled from his temple where one of them had struck him. "Look what we found skulking around our home," the scarred leader said as he approached, wiping his bloody hands on his chest. "Spies. Thieves, perhaps, come to steal our food." Kira's mind raced. Fight or flee? But there was nowhere to run, and even if she escaped, they had Thak. "We mean no harm," she said, raising her hands slowly. "We're just hungry. Our tribe is starving." The leader's smile widened, revealing teeth filed to sharp points, a modification she had never seen before, but one that served an obvious and terrifying purpose. "Hungry?" he said, tilting his head like a predator examining prey. "Well, we can help with that. The question is whether you'll be eating." He paused, letting his gaze travel slowly up and down her emaciated frame. "Or being eaten." The cave fell silent, except for the pop and hiss of burning fat dripping into the fire. Kira could feel the weight of 7 pairs of eyes studying her, measuring her worth as prey versus predator. Thak whimpered softly, blood now flowing more freely from his head wound. "Please," Kira said, though the word tasted like ash in her mouth. "We have nothing to give you but our labor. Our loyalty." The scarred leader laughed a sound like hyenas fighting over a carcass. "Loyalty? From strangers who come creeping in the shadows." He gestured toward the partially consumed body by the fire. This one spoke of loyalty too, right until the end. One of the females rose from her place by the fire, her movements unnaturally fluid. As she stepped into the light, Kira saw that her face was painted with ochre and blood in patterns that hurt to look at, swirling designs that seemed to writhe in the flickering flames. "She's too thin," the female said, circling Kira like a vulture. Barely any meat on these bones. But the male ... quotes, she studied Thak with professional interest. The male has some flesh left. Kira's mind raced through possibilities. Fight and die. Submit and be eaten. Or, you're hunting the wrong prey, she said suddenly, her voice gaining strength from desperation. The leader raised an eyebrow. Oh? My tribe. 14 healthy adults and children, hiding in caves less than a day's walk from here. They trust me. They would welcome me if I returned with ... do friends. The silence stretched like a taut hunting line. Kira could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could smell the fear sweat on her own skin mixing with the metallic scent of spilled blood. You would betray your own people? The painted female asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Kira met her gaze steadily, though inside she felt something vital breaking apart. I would live, and my companion would live. Is that not the first law of existence? The leader studied her for a long moment, then suddenly burst into laughter. But this time, there was approval in the sound. Yes, exactly. The first law, the only law that matters when the world tries to starve you to death. He gestured to his followers, who relaxed their grip on their weapons but remained alert. My name is Grak. These are my hunters. We were once like you, weak, starving, waiting for death to take us one by one. But then we discovered the truth. What truth? Kira asked, though she dreaded the answer. That meat is meat, Grak said simply. That survival belongs to those strong enough to take what they need. Your ancestors, my ancestors, the beasts of the field, we're all just walking food for something else. The only question is whether you'll be the hunter or the hunted. As if to emphasize his point, he tore a chunk of flesh from the body by the fire and offered it to her. Eat. Prove you understand. Kira stared at the bloody meat, her stomach churning even as it cramped with hunger. This was the line. Once crossed, there would be no going back. She would become like them, a predator of her own species. But Thak was still bleeding, still in danger. And her tribe was still starving. She reached for the meat. The moment her fingers closed around the warm flesh, she felt something change inside her. Not just the desperate relief of finally having food, but something deeper, darker, as if a door in her mind had opened that could never be closed again. Good, Grak purred. Now, tell us about these caves where your people hide. Tell us about their defenses, their weapons, their weaknesses. Kira began to speak, her voice steady despite the horror of what she was doing. But even as she betrayed everything she had once held sacred, a part of her mind was working frantically on a different plan. Because there was one thing Grak and his hunters didn't know. One crucial fact that might save her people and destroy the monsters who had made her into a monster herself. But first, she would have to become one of them completely. And that meant finishing what she had started. She bit into the human flesh, tasting copper and salt and the end of innocence. 3 days later, Kira led the hunting party through the twisted canyons toward her tribe's hidden sanctuary. Her stomach had finally stopped rebelling against the unnatural meat, though she couldn't tell if that was adaptation or damnation. Beside her walked Grak, his scarred face animated with the anticipation of fresh prey. How many children? Asked Vera, the painted female who had become Grak's lieutenant. Her teeth had been filed to points like the others, a ritual Kira had been forced to endure on her second night with the cannibals. 4, Kira replied, the lie coming easily now. In truth, there were 6 children in her tribe, but she had learned to speak in the language her captors understood. Information was currency, and she was carefully managing her account. The hunting party consisted of 12 cannibals, armed with stone axes and spears tipped with sharpened bone. They moved through the landscape like a plague, leaving behind the scattered remains of 2 other tribes they had encountered along the way. Kira had been forced to participate, to prove her loyalty with blood. Each kill had made the next easier. Each scream she ignored had deadened something inside her chest. But beneath the growing callus of survival, her true plan continued to grow. "There," she said, pointing to a cluster of rocks ahead. "The entrance is hidden behind those boulders. But we must be careful. My people know these caves better than any others." Grak grinned, his filed teeth glinting in the afternoon sun. "Let them know the caves. We know hunger. Hunger always wins." As they approached the familiar landmarks of her childhood, Kira felt a stab of genuine anguish. The cave where she had learned to make tools. The stream where she had played as a child. The sacred grove where her people honored their ancestors. All of it would be defiled by what was coming. But then she remembered the other caves Grak's tribe inhabited. The walls covered in tally marks counting victims. The pit filled with bones too numerous to identify. The children's skulls arranged like trophies around the main fire. Her people would die anyway if she didn't act. At least this way, some might survive. "Remember," Grak whispered as they took positions around the cave entrance. "The young ones alive if possible. Fresh meat spoils quickly in this heat, but living meat keeps." Kira nodded, then gave the signal. Her voice echoed off the canyon walls, the familiar call she had used since childhood to announce her return. "Myra! Jorik! It's Kira! I've returned with friends." The response came immediately, joyful shouts from within the cave, the sounds of people moving toward the entrance. Her heart broke as she heard young Tam's voice calling her name in excitement. "Kira, did you find food? We've been so hungry." The first of her people emerged into the sunlight, smiling and rushing toward her with the desperate relief of the starving. Elder Mira, her surrogate grandmother. Jorik, barely 16, but already showing the lean muscle of a skilled hunter. Little Tam, whose 6th winter had been so hard they thought they would lose him. All of them running toward salvation that was actually slaughter. "Now!" Grak roared. The cannibals erupted from concealment like a pack of hyenas, their weapons raised and their filed teeth bared in savage grins. The peaceful reunion became a battlefield in seconds. But Kira was already moving. As Vera lunged toward little Tam with her bone-tipped spear, Kira intercepted the strike with her own weapon. The impact sent vibrations up her arm, but her blade found its mark sliding between Vera's ribs and into her heart. "The betrayer betrays." She shouted over the sounds of battle. "Run! Into the deep caves! Follow the sacred path!" Chaos erupted as her people realized what was happening. Some fled immediately, trusting Kira's warning. Others stood frozen in confusion. A few tried to fight, only to be overwhelmed by the cannibal's savage efficiency. Grak's eyes found hers across the battlefield, and in them she saw not just rage, but a kind of impressed admiration. "Clever little prey," he snarled, advancing toward her with his massive stone axe. But not clever enough. Behind him, 3 more cannibals had cornered Elder Mira against the cave wall. Her weathered hands clutched a flint knife, but her movements were slow with age and hunger. Kira had perhaps seconds to act before her entire plan collapsed into nothing but mutual destruction. She reached into the leather pouch at her waist and withdrew the small clay vessel she had stolen from the cannibal's cave 3 nights earlier. Inside was the most precious substance she had ever possessed. Fire oil, the sacred burning water that flowed from certain rocks, which the cannibals used to create flames that couldn't be extinguished with water. "You want to see betrayal?" she shouted, raising the vessel high. "Let me show you what real betrayal looks like." The clay vessel felt impossibly heavy in Kira's hands as she held it above the battlefield. Around her, the sounds of slaughter echoed off the canyon walls, the wet thud of stone meeting flesh, the screams of the dying, the snarl of predators claiming their prey. Grak had stopped his advance, his scarred face twisted with confusion. "What is that, little betrayer?" "Your sacred fire oil," Kira replied, backing slowly toward the cave entrance. "The one you used to burn the bones of your victims. the one that burns even underwater. Understanding dawned in the cannibal leader's eyes, followed immediately by fury. "You dare steal from us? You dare! I dare everything!" Kira screamed, her voice cracking with rage and grief. "You made me into a monster. You made me betray my own people. But monsters can learn new tricks." She hurled the vessel against the cave wall where it shattered, sending the precious oil splashing across the stone. Then, moving faster than she ever had in her life, she struck her flint against the iron pyrite embedded in her spear tip. Sparks flew. The oil ignited with a roar that seemed to come from the earth's very bones. Blue and orange flames raced across the stone surface, creating a wall of fire between the cannibals and the cave entrance. "The deep caves!" she shouted to her people. "Follow the ancestor path to the sacred chamber. Go." Elder Mira needed no further encouragement. Despite her age, she moved with surprising speed into the cave's depths, followed by the few survivors who had managed to avoid capture. Little Tam paused at the entrance, his young eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Kira, are you coming?" "Go," she commanded. "I'll hold them here." But even as she said it, she could see the cannibals finding ways around the fire. Grak himself was already scaling the canyon wall, preparing to circle around and cut off their escape. Others were dousing themselves with water from their skins, preparing to charge through the flames. She had bought her people minutes at most, and she was trapped on the wrong side of her own barrier. A bone spear whistled past her head, embedding itself in the cave wall with a sharp crack. Another cannibal, a young male she recognized from the feeding circles, was approaching from her left flank, his stone axe raised for a killing blow. Kira dodged backward, feeling the heat of the sacred fire scorching her back. There was nowhere left to retreat. This would be her final stand. But as the young cannibal closed the distance between them, something unexpected happened. From the depths of the cave behind her came a sound she had never heard before, a deep, rumbling roar that seemed to shake the very stones beneath her feet. The attacking cannibal stopped mid-charge, his confident expression replaced by primal terror. What was that? Kira felt her own blood turn to ice. She knew these caves better than anyone, had explored every tunnel and chamber since childhood. There was nothing in the deep places that could make a sound like that. Nothing that should be alive down there at all. The roar came again, closer this time, accompanied by a fetid wind that carried the stench of decay. And something far worse, the smell of things that had been dead for a very long time but somehow still moved. "The ancestors," she whispered, finally understanding why the deepest chambers had always been forbidden to the living. Why the elders had always warned that some places were meant only for the dead. Grak dropped down from the canyon wall, his face pale despite his scars. "What have you awakened?" Before Kira could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Dust and small stones rained from the cave ceiling as something massive moved through the passages below. And with each tremor, the ancient wall paintings throughout the cave began to glow with a cold, phosphorescent light. Images of the first people, the ancestor spirits, the guardians of the sacred places, images that seemed to be moving. The cannibals began to back away from the cave entrance, their earlier bloodlust replaced by a terror older than memory. Even the flames seemed to dim in the presence of whatever was rising from the depths. Kira stood at the threshold between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors, realizing that her betrayal had awakened something that had slept for countless generations. Something that did not approve of what humanity had become. The roar echoed again, and this time, Kira could swear she heard words in it. Ancient words in the old tongue, speaking of judgment and cleansing and the price of breaking the most sacred laws. Behind her, the ancestor spirit stirred. Before her, the cannibals who had made her into a monster cowered in the dust. And somewhere in between, her people huddled in the dark, waiting to see whether salvation or damnation would claim them all. The ground split open with a sound like the world's bones breaking. From the chasm rose shapes that defied description, forms that might once have been human, but have been changed by death and time into something far more terrible. Their eyes burned with the cold fire of stars, and their voices carried the weight of every violation committed against the sacred laws. Kira fell to her knees as the ancestor spirits emerged from their ancient resting place. These were the first ones, the original guardians of the deep caves, awakened by the scent of forbidden flesh and the breaking of the oldest taboo. What have we done? Grek whispered, his scarred face now pale as bone. Around him, his hunting party had collapsed in terror, their filed teeth chattering with fear. The largest of the spirits, a towering figure whose features shifted between male and female. Young and ancient, turned its burning gaze upon the cannibals. When it spoke, its voice echoed from the stone walls themselves. You have tasted the flesh of your own kind. You have made prey of those who share your blood. You have awakened that which was meant to sleep until the world's ending. Kira watched in horrified fascination as the spirit's attention shifted to her. She expected judgment, condemnation for her role in the betrayal. Instead, she found something unexpected in those ancient eyes. Understanding. Little daughter, the spirit said, its voice now gentle as a mother's lullaby. You were given an impossible choice. Survival demanded betrayal. Betrayal demanded sacrifice. You chose to sacrifice yourself rather than your people. But I killed, Kira whispered. I ate forbidden's flesh. I led them here. To save those who could not save themselves, the spirit replied. The ancestors do not judge the desperate choices of the living. We judge only those who choose cruelty over compassion, predation over protection. The spirit raised one ethereal hand and the cannibals began to scream. Their bodies contorted, as if invisible forces were tearing at them from within. The flesh they had consumed, human flesh, forbidden flesh, began to burn them from the inside out. One by one, they collapsed, their filed teeth falling from their mouths like broken promises. But they did not die quickly. You will know hunger as your victims knew hunger, the spirit intoned. You will know fear as they knew fear. And you will wander the deep places, always searching for satisfaction you can never find, always fleeing from horrors you cannot escape. As the cannibals writhed in agony, their forms began to change. Their limbs stretched and thinned. Their skin grew pale and translucent. Their eyes sank deep into their skulls, burning with eternal hunger that could never be satisfied. They had become something new, something that belonged neither to the world of the living nor the realm of the dead. Go, the spirit commanded them. Dwell in the deepest caves where no living thing ventures. Feed on stones and shadows. Remember always what you chose to become. The transformed cannibals fled into the darkness, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the passages as they disappeared into the deepest parts of the earth. Silence fell over the canyon. Kira remained on her knees, waiting for her own judgment. She had eaten the forbidden's flesh. She had betrayed her people, even if it was to save them. Surely the ancestors would demand payment. Instead, the spirit reached down and touched her forehead with one luminous finger. The touch burned, but not with pain, with purification. Your people will survive, it said. They will remember this day and pass the story down through countless generations. They will remember that survival sometimes demands terrible choices, but that the consequences of those choices are not always what they seem. And me? Kira asked. The spirit smiled, and in that expression she saw the faces of every ancestor who had come before, every choice that had led to this moment. You will return to your people. You will help them rebuild. You will teach them that the strongest law is not survival, but the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. And when your time comes to join us in the deep places, you will rest knowing that your betrayal became their salvation. As the spirits began to fade back into the stone, the eldest one spoke one final time. "But beware, daughter of the living. Those who fled into the darkness will hunger always. They will whisper from the deep caves, trying to tempt others to join them. The choice between survival and compassion will come again. Make sure your descendants choose wisely." The spirits vanished, leaving only the lingering scent of sacred fires and the soft sound of her people emerging from the depths. Little Tam was the first to reach her, his small arms wrapping around her neck with desperate relief. "Kira, we thought you were lost." She held him close, feeling the warmth of living flesh and the steady beat of an innocent heart. Behind him came Elder Mira, Jorik, and the others, few in number but alive, whole, saved by her choice to become a monster in order to destroy the monsters. But as they prepared to leave the canyon and find a new home far from the cursed caves, Kira could hear something echoing from the deep places. A sound like grinding teeth and endless hunger. The transformed cannibals were still down there, waiting in the darkness. And somewhere in the world, other tribes faced the same desperate choices that had led to this day. The story was not over. It would never truly be over. But for now, her people were safe. For now, that was enough. As they walked away from the caves toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Kira looked back one last time. In the growing darkness, she could swear she saw pale shapes moving in the depths, forever searching for satisfaction they would never find. The price of flesh had been paid, but the echoes of that payment would resonate through the ages, a warning carved in stone and shadow for all who came after. Some choices, once made, could never be undone. Some hungers could never be satisfied. And in the deepest caves of the world, things that were no longer human waited for their chance to whisper again.